This is Joe Carpenter. Today is October the 16th, 2021, and I am interviewing Bobby Jack Poe for the first time. This interview is taking place at Bobby Jack Poe's home in Oklahoma. This interview is sponsored by the College of Liberal Arts and is part of the Maverick Veterans Voices Project. Thank you for letting us in your home.
You're very welcome. I'm proud to be interviewed. I think it's a real honor.
Thank you. So where were you from originally, and what can you tell me about your growing up?
Well, I was actually born at Harris Hospital in Fort Worth, lived in Arlington until I was 2. My father was drafted into the military to fight in World War II and fought the Germans in both Italy and Africa. He was wounded in Italy, and I didn't see him from the time I was 2 years old until I was 5 years old. Oh, during that time, I lived with my grandparents in a little town called Tail, Texas.
Where is that?
Tail, Texas is about 15 miles outside of Childress, Texas. Okay. Not really in the Panhandle, but it is in West Texas. Yeah. My sister was born and 2 years old before my father ever saw her. So wow. That's kind of the way I grew up. I didn't know my father as my father until he returned, and I was almost 6 years old. At that time, he built a home in Arlington, and I lived there basically the rest of my life.
Okay. Where did you go to high school?
I went to Arlington High School.
Okay.
I went to Owsley Junior High, which was the only junior high in Arlington at the time. It was one grade, and it was just the 8th grade.
Were you involved in ROTC in high school?
Arlington did not have an ROTC program. I had no really experience with military per se. I had some of my father's insignias that I wound up with, and I like to play military, and one of my uncles was a Marine, and I had his little Marine insignia, and I had uncles that were in the Navy and the Seabees and the Army. I had 6 different uncles. A couple of them fought in Korea, but the others fought during World War II. Mm-hmm.
So how then did you become interested in the military? Is that how you became interested in the military?
No, it was just, I feel like all my life I've had a guardian angel. I grew up in a Christian home, and my mother was a missionary. My dad was a lay preacher. He even was asked by Billy Graham to go to Japan with him to preach the gospel in Japan, and did. I was a naive, basically a preacher's kid growing up, and I don't know how else to explain it. I grew up in a very sheltered way. Mm-hmm.
So why did you choose to attend Arlington State College when you did?
My father wasn't wealthy. We weren't poor, but we were middle class, and he told me the first year I decided, he didn't encourage me to go to college. He just said, "Bob, here's $100. You go to school any place you want to."
That was generous.
I lived about 3 miles from the college.
Yeah.
And after I became a Jody, I found it easier for me to run home than it was to fight the parking at the college.
Is that
so
right?
Many times I would take off to school jogging or running as you'd call it, and I would run to school from my house.
Wow.
Which was on Randall Mill Road, where the new football stadium is located today.
Right. I know that
my address was 210 East Randall Mill Road. There is a parking lot where my house used to be.
Is that right? They set up a historical marker?
It's in my mind.
Sure. Yeah. So you participated in ROTC at Arlington State College.
Yes, my best friend was Bobby Cahill at the time, and his brother was a Jody, Larry Cahill. And Bobby said he was going to go out for the Sam Houston Rifles, which I had no idea. I thought maybe they did shooting. I was a good shot back then. I could shoot whatever I was looking at, I could hit. I grew up with a gun. And so I said, that's good enough for me. And I had no idea how to recognize an officer from a private. I didn't know one thing for another. I didn't know who to salute, who not to salute. All I found out after I got into the Jodies was how to spit shine boots and clean rifles and all the other things that we learned to do as cruds while I was in the Jodies.
So what was your major?
I had a double major, plus I studied to be a teacher. You had to take a special education minor to become a teacher through Arlington State College at that time. And so you had to have a double major. So I majored in math and political science. So that was my majors when I was in school.
Why did you choose those majors?
Why did I choose those? I loved math, and I needed something a secondary teaching field, and that's where the political science came in.
Okay.
I had no idea I'd become so politically involved as I got older. I love doing politics. My wife doesn't like that because she's afraid I'll get in trouble or somebody's going to come burn my house down. But
I would hope not.
I grew up as an adult in municipal government.
I see.
And as a municipal government employee, I was not allowed to get involved in politics whatsoever. I was very leery anytime I spoke on TV or radio that I would say something that would politically injure my boss, who was either a city manager or a mayor or a commissioner. So I stayed away from it completely until after I retired, and then I became very active. I'm active in Oklahoma Stand Up and the Republican Party and anything to do in church that is conservative.
And was there anyone on the faculty at Arlington State College that influenced you?
Well, yes, after I graduated, there were a number of ones. Dr. Frank Anderson, who was over the Institute of Urban Studies, and Dr. Brobst, who was in the School of Business. These were faculty members that I actually worked for. I don't remember the head of the department of the business department when I was there, but I actually taught school at UTA for 7 years or 7 different semesters. Well, actually, it was more like 13 semesters.
Oh, wow.
So,
what did you teach?
I taught a course called CICS for the COBOL programmer.
Oh. Okay.
It was a programming language that allowed video terminals, to interface with files that resided on IBM's largest mainframes.
Okay. And what year did you graduate from college?
I graduated in August of 1966.
And were you commissioned upon graduation?
No, that's another story to itself. I like 2 hours of getting my commission. I had to work to go to college. I was promised by Colonel Manifold that they would make exceptions. He was shipped out to Vietnam. The new cadre that came into the military science department didn't want to fool with people that were working full time, and didn't make accommodations for 8 of us that worked full time. I was given a honorable discharge for personal hardship reasons, and I fully expected to be drafted at any moment. But upon graduation, I went 3 different times to take my physical, but never was called. I worked as a math teacher upon graduation for 1 year, and then I went to work at LTV after that, and I helped build A7s and refurbish F8s and S3As and other military bombers and attack planes. I did that for 5 years. During the Vietnam War, when the war ended, the population of that defense plant went from 30,000 down to 3,000, and that's how I wound up. I considered being in the military. Working at that place was just like being in the military. I had to wear a uniform. I had to check in through security gates every day. I had a top secret clearance there. Not just a secret. I got a secret whenever I was in the military ROTC. I was this close to getting my commission, but Captain Joyce saw fit that I did not get my commission because he didn't want to take the time to allow me to take a tactics course on his time.
I see. So after your time, well, first of all, what did you do exactly? Are you able to say what you did at LTV?
Yes, I was. Basically, I was a pioneer in computer software development for that company. I developed training programs. I developed software programs that helped them define and build A7A through D fighter bombers. I was basically a computer analyst for that company. They found out I was a math major, and they said they needed someone to be an engineering computer specialist, and they said, "You're it." So that's how I got into computers, was through LTV.
So briefly, what did you do after you left LTV?
I took a job working as a programming manager for the city of Garland. And I worked there for 5 years doing that. And we became known as the online city. Everything in Garland that we could automate, we did. And it was working in conjunction with IBM. And we were beta testers for their programming, their program products that allowed people to write programs through terminals. And then we beta tested their software called CICS, and that's how I learned to program in CICS.
See?
And it was at a different level then. It was called macro level. And I developed numerous program products there that IBM actually wound up selling to the general public that I wrote personally.
Oh, wow.
But through my efforts at that city, I was approached by the city of Corpus Christi, and they asked me to be their director. And so I moved from programming manager to the director's position, and I worked there for 9 years at that city. Then I came back to the Dallas-Fort Worth area to the Dallas Appraisal District, where I was their director of information services and communications, was over all their phones and phone systems and the computer and all the people in support of that equipment. And then I went to work at Sweepstakes Clearinghouse. And I developed all their programs, and I guarantee you can be a winner through that system.
You can. Yeah, everybody's a winner.
Exactly.
So give me the time frame that you were first at LTV and became involved in the early days of computers, all the way through your time at Garland, Corpus Christi, and back in Dallas. What time frame are we talking about?
Okay, I went to work at LTV in 1966. And then I worked there for 5 years. And then I went to work for Garland for 5 years. And then I went to work for Corpus for 9 years. So 19 years from, or 20 years basically from 1966 gets me through Corpus. And then I worked for 4 years at Dallas Appraisal District. And I worked for 4 years at Sweepstakes Clearinghouse. And that brings me up to the 80s. And during that period, I went back to work for the University of Texas at Arlington as in the School of Business, actually teaching CICS for the COBOL programmer. Prior to that, I had been on consulting contract with the Institute of Urban Studies through Dr. Frank Anderson, and was instrumental in starting the Texas Association of Governmental Data Processing Managers. I was the founding father for that statewide association, and I assume that that association is still active today. You know, I was held many offices in that association, including secretary treasurer and historian and president, vice president. I was also a member of another elite group for 9 years called MIX, and it was an IBM think group for large IBM mainframe users. That acronym stood for Metropolitan Information Exchange. We would get with the IBM vice presidents and above. They have all kinds of hierarchy at IBM.
Right.
And try to steer them in the direction that would be beneficial to both of us. And we would tell them what we liked about IBM, and what we didn't like about IBM, what programs would help us do our job better. And I was honored to be on that elite group. And then I was also, during this time frame in Corpus, when I was director there, and when I was director at the Dallas Appraisal District, I attended 2 European conferences representing the United States. And this organization was called ALGIS, and it was an academy, and I did receive a European title I'm a fellow for that academy, and I attended conference in Ennis, Ireland, and Belgium, Brussels, Belgium, and I was invited to go to another one, but by that time I had gotten out of government, and I was working at Sweepstakes Clearinghouse, and I declined that offer. And by that time, computers and the people that supported had diversified enough that they didn't care whether you were in government or not. As long as you were at the executive level, they wanted input from those type of people. So they encouraged me to attend one in Canada, but I didn't go to that one. We would always write various papers that would be published that were available to anyone that needed to know our experience with various different subjects, from word processing to hardware, upgrading software programs, etc.
Let me back up a little bit. Were you married when you were in college, or was that after college?
I was married the last 2 years I was in college. I worked at least 2 jobs. I was all the time I was in school, and I was married, and I was on the Jodies, and the Jodies took up a lot of extra time. So I was pretty busy.
Yeah, sounds like it.
I didn't have children until after I got out of college. So.
And your first job out of college was what?
my first job was teaching math at Carter Junior High
Okay.
in the Arlington Independent School District.
Right. Okay.
One of my jobs while I was in college was driving a school bus.
Yeah.
And so it was an easy transition into their system from being a school bus driver to being a math professor at a junior high.
Right. And
By the way, my salary that year in 1966 was $5,022.
yeah.
And
so
I went to work after 1 year of teaching at LTV and doubled my salary.
So, needless to say, AISD was not paying
Not very much.
big salaries at that time.
Really, they were the highest paying district at that time in the whole state of Texas.
Is that right?
Yes.
So, let's go back again to college for a minute because I have another question for you, and I want you to address this specifically because we talked about it. Did you experience any discrimination while you were in college? And how did that affect your career? You've addressed some of that, but can you be more specific?
My experience in the political science department was really my first experience with dealing with people in management outside my immediate family.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that experience, it's influenced me tremendously in my ability to really, I hate to say this, judge people.
Mm-hmm.
But I was able, because of the people involved in Arlington State College military science, have both the best and the worst of all managers. Mm-hmm. Major Manifold being the very best. And I think that Captain Joyce was the very worst. Mm-hmm. And every job I took after that was weighed against those two people. Mm-hmm. And if I ever got a boss that was leaning toward Captain Joyce, as soon as I found out he was like Captain Joyce, I left that position and found me another job. Whenever I found somebody that was like Major Manifold, I would stick to them until they left, and then I would find me another job.
Right.
So that was a pretty big influence in my life.
Tell me how you met your current wife.
I met my current wife during the period in my life where I was trying to get over my first wife. Mm-hmm. I'd been married to my high school sweetheart for 26, 27 years. I went with her for 3 years before that. So a 30-year relationship with my first wife ended. And instead of sitting around the house feeling sorry for myself, I decided to pick up something that would put me back in shape physically, and I started country and western dancing. Mm-hmm. And I got so good at it that I started teaching it. And my wife, Barbara, who is also a Corps sweetheart and a colonel in the Corps, approached me and asked me if I would teach her some of the advanced moves that I did as an instructor. And I said yes, so obviously. And so we actually met at a club in Grand Prairie by the name of Steppers, and where I taught advanced dancing for the Fort Worth Shuffle.
What is
I knew
that?
about her before that because we were both from Arlington. She was a majorette for the high school band, and she had been around all the same events that I had been around, all the parades and different high school functions. She was there. She was ahead of me. I was a little younger than her, but I had recognized her by her pretty legs.
I see. Okay. And so from this teaching her to dance, this ultimately led to your marriage. Is that?
Well, we during that period of my life when I was trying to get over my first wife, she had called me. We actually had dated for, not dated. I'd been teaching her for over 2 years, one day a week for 2 years. We met for an hour, and I taught her different advanced moves in the Fort Worth Shuffle. And sometime during that period, she asked me to go to a birthday party with her where she would have somebody to dance with at that party. And I was engaged to another girl at that point,
I see.
which that didn't work out for a lot of reasons. And I declined to go with her because I didn't think it was right. And later on, the girl I was engaged to at that time and I went our different ways. She had some kids that were really not compatible with me, and I knew that it would only lead to future problems. So we parted ways. We never had a single crossword between us the whole time we were considering getting married. We were trying to learn whether or not we could be compatible.
Right.
And because of her children, I called it quits.
Okay.
And I was in that period where I wasn't in any relationship with anybody, and one of my competition dance partners, her boyfriend was coming into town, and she wanted us to have a double date and go to Jose Garcia's restaurant there in Fort Worth.
Okay.
So I thought about Barbara, and I picked up the phone and called Barbara and said, you want to go out to dinner tonight? And she said, just a second, I've got to think about that. And she says, yes, I do want to go out. And she had plans with somebody else that night, and she had to call and cancel. So, but we went out to dinner that night. We had a couple of margaritas, and we've been having a couple of margaritas ever since then.
So how long have y'all been married now?
We've been married 28 years.
Now, between you, how many children altogether?
Well, we have 6 children altogether. We have one that we've adopted, and then together, and then I have a goddaughter, and then we have I have a son and a daughter from my first wife, and she has 2 living children from her first marriage. He was also an Arlington State University graduate. You know, John went to school at Arlington State when it was a 2-year college.
I see.
And he went to the Junior Rose Bowl as the quarterback for the Arlington State College when they won the Junior Rose Bowl.
Is that
and he
right?
went on to Rice, became
Wow.
an engineer and worked for Exxon until he took cancer and died at a very young age.
Wow.
So Barbara was a widow.
John, what was his last name?
Snobble.
Okay.
And he's in the Hall of Fame there at Arlington University
Okay.
as a recognized, he got his PhD and all that stuff. So
Okay.
he was a well-recognized engineer with Exxon.
Great.
And Barbara has 3 children, and I have 2.
Okay.
And then we have an adopted child, and I have a goddaughter. So that's our immediate family, plus our grandchildren. And
How many grandchildren?
15 grandchildren and great-grandchildren. So,
Goodness.
And don't ask me their names because I probably couldn't tell you all of them.
I was going to ask
track.
you. I was going to ask you their birth dates.
Oh,
is
thank
what
you
I was
very
gonna
much.
do. If you could do it all over again, your experience at Arlington State College, and your work schedule and all of that, what would you change?
Well, I wouldn't let people like Captain Joyce run roughshod over me. I would stand up to what I consider to be totalitarian tyranny attitude toward young men that are naive, if to say the least. I've never been one to be bullied, and I owe that to Captain Joyce. I would try to associate with people like Major Manifold, Rex Latham, Al Ellis, Bunky Garanzik. Bunky's controversial, but he's true blue.
Legendary.
Lucifer Smith is right at the top of the list of people that I became affiliated with through the military science department, and I truly love these people as brothers. The memories that I have with them will be there until my dying day.
And you stay in contact with a lot of these folks?
I do through social media mostly. Even Steve Kennedy and I are close through the college and through social media, and yourself. I stay in contact through social media. Lucifer, I guess we exchange comments at least once or twice a week.
Yeah.
Bunky, I probably stay in some kind of contact with him once or twice a year.
Yeah.
But we do stay in contact. And Bobby Cahill, he's still my best friend, even though we don't see each other but once or every 5 years. But
Right.
I met him through the Jodys. Also, Larry Henry, I met him through the Jodys, and we were best friends in high school, and we still stay in contact through social media. So,
Did you involve yourself in any veterans organizations during your civilian career after you were
not
out of-
really. That wasn't what, I didn't consider, and I don't consider myself a true veteran, even though I was actively involved in a support function as anybody could be, and not be actually in the military. When you work at LTV, you are as close to being on the front lines as a lot of people that were actually in the military. I had 8 different people that I personally knew that died out there on that defense plant grounds from various accidents, including explosions and airplane crashes and mostly accidents.
Right.
But it wasn't a safe place to work.
Right.
I've lost part of my hearing because of that place. I had to work on a mezzanine floor right above all of the air rivet guns and drills and all the machine guns. Those Gatling guns were going off out there right near me, that they had to test fire every one of them. Every airplane that went out of there had to be lashed down and run a certain period of time with full afterburners on and a full engine RPMs before they'd even let one of the test pilots get in them. So it was extremely noisy place to work, and I do owe part of my hearing loss to that job.
Yeah, I imagine. How often do you return to the what's now UTA campus?
Well, more so now than before. I have a grandson that's in the engineering program out there, and
Great.
we go see him on an occasion, and then through my high school reunion group, I I participate in all the reunions that they put together, and we wind up going to eat out there someplace near the campus. And I don't know, you can't go to Arlington without being on the campus. You know, it's probably the biggest thing in Arlington.
Kind of spread out a little bit, hasn't it? What do you think about the changes that have happened to the campus since you were there?
Well, you know, I worked on construction of many of the buildings as my part-time job when I was going to college at UTA. T.C. Bateson built the student center, and he built the admin building and the library, and added on to both the men's and the girls' dorm. All of those buildings, I actually worked as a laborer or a carpenter's helper or a iron worker helper or some subcontractor's helper, just general labor, because my father was the general superintendent for constructing all those buildings.
I see.
And so he made sure that during the summer I had a job. And if there was some part-time job that he needed somebody to take care of, I did that. For instance, on at least the library and the admin building, I was responsible for keeping the floors from freezing during the wintertime when they would pour the concrete on those multi-storied buildings. They had to run heaters at night, and my job was 2 in the morning, get up every morning at 2 and refilled heaters that were called salamander heaters with kerosene and make sure they were lit, and they would stay lit until the next crew of people that came in around 7 got there, and they'd refill them and keep those floors at a certain temperature so that during the wintertime when it get down below freezing, it wouldn't damage the concrete. So that was one of the jobs I actually had while I was going to school out there at UTA. So I have a lot of roots at UTA, more than most people.
I was going to say, you've got a lot more invested in UTA than probably anybody else, and as far as what's left standing anyway.
But that was part of my pre-adult period in life, and part of my Jody's, because I had to work the Jody's in around that schedule, and a lot of people didn't know that I was getting up at 2 o'clock in the morning every night, and it would take me an hour to do that job, and I got paid for 4. So it was, and that was good pay for me back then.
Right.
I had a $63 a month car payment and a $65 a month house payment, and my reserve officer's pay was like $110 a month. I don't remember. It was somewhere just over $100. And then I drove the school bus full time, and that was $150 a month. I had more money than I could spend because I didn't have time to spend it.
So do you have any advice for young people entering the ROTC or entering the military? If you do, what would that be?
Well, I dearly love the military as a profession. If I had it to do all over again, I would do everything possible to go in as an officer. Like I said, my dad was in the military. All my uncles were in the military. They were all fighting veterans. They didn't just go in and hold down a position. They all actually fought in the war, one war or another. My dad didn't have good thoughts about the military. He thought that the enlisted men were nothing better than cannon fodder. That's what he called them, cannon fodder. And he didn't like it because I love the military.
Right.
But he didn't.
He was enlisted?
He was drafted. So at the age of 20, and he got blown out of a Jeep in Italy by a landmine or some type of mine, and he was driving a lieutenant back from the front, and it killed the lieutenant, blew him off into the ocean, and that ended his basic military career. He was in the hospital like 9 months before he came back to the States, and he was on full disability. They didn't expect him to live, but he did. So, and then my one uncle fought the Japanese hand-to-hand combat for 30-something days, and he couldn't be awakened from a sleep without fear of being hurt.
Right.
That was an adverse effect of that war with him. I had another uncle that a Japanese Zero crashed on him. They didn't find him for 10 days later, and he was burned really bad and covered in maggots, and that's what saved his life. They ate all the infected skin and burns off of him. I had another uncle that was on a destroyer and fought in the Navy, was injured from being attacked by the Japanese, and then I had one uncle that was in the Marines, and he went to Germany but didn't have to go to Korea. And then I had two uncles that actually fought in the Korean War. So had a lot of military exposure through my family. I just knew that I respected the military officers, and that's what I wanted to be, and that's why I joined up to be in the military at University. Well, it's actually called Arlington State College when I joined in the ROTC program.
So these people in the ROTC now, what would you say to them? What would be your best advice?
I would say that it's an admirable profession. It's a needed profession. If I had it to do over again, I would try to maintain my relationship with the Army. Who knows, I might have been a computer specialist in the Army.
Right.
My branch assignment was such that it could have very well led me down that same path. I don't know, but I never looked back. Once I got out of the ROTC program, I just kept charging ahead, and I knew that was a chapter in my life that I couldn't go back to, and so I tried to open up a new chapter every day.
Right. Yeah, and you did so very successfully. So is there anything that you would like to add to this interview that we haven't covered?
Well, throughout my entire life, from the time I was saved until today, I've always believed that I have had a guardian angel that's watched over me. I'm sure that guardian angel had some influence on me getting out of the ROTC program there at UTA. I'm sure that guardian angel has protected me in all my crazy wild stunts of climbing mountains and racing motorcycles and other endeavors that I did as crazy hobbies. I'm still able to walk and function as a farmer right now, and
Right.
That's another story and another chapter in my life.
So how did you get to that? Let's go ahead and talk about that for a minute. So when did you retire?
I actually quit working for somebody else in the year 2000, actually 2001. I worked for a company that supported small and medium-sized cities, cities the size of Garland and Plano and Corpus, that specialized in law enforcement and courts. We installed their hardware and their software and provided help center service for them. Anytime the state laws changed, we would go in and update their programs for them. They didn't have to have a data processing department. It was a statewide support data processing service for that particular niche in municipal government. And as you can remember, there was a big hullabaloo about the transition from the turn of the century
Yes.
with all the computers. And
Y2K.
so I had to make sure that all of those, I think there were 68 different cities that I supported as a manager, and I had all the people in that company that wrote programs and supported those applications. Everybody but the marketing people reported to me. And we made sure that their computers would work and their software programs were up to date. And after the year 2000, there wasn't any future for me at that company.
Sure.
And so Barbara and I, we wanted to retire outside of the big city, and we started looking around for a place, and we bought 160 acres in south central Oklahoma, and we've been living here since 2000.
And we're on Poe Farm now, is that right?
We are on the Poe Farm. We raise chicken, bees, dogs, and grandkids.
Great. I want to thank you for having us in your home, and thank you for taking the time to interview with us for the Maverick Veterans Voices Project. Thank you for your hospitality, and we appreciate it.
Well, you're more than welcome. I consider it an honor to be part of this activity. You know, there's a lot of us out there that have been successful in life because of the experiences they had at the University of Texas at Arlington, or Arlington State College, or Arlington State University. I think the name of the college changed 4 times my last semester there. It was Arlington State College, Arlington State University, the Texas A&M system, then it was Arlington State University, Texas University system, then it became UTA. But all that happened the last year I was in school. I didn't know what my diploma was going to look like, but it actually does say Arlington State University, Texas system. So
One thing we do know is that all those changes were not your fault. I think we know that. All right. Well, thank you.